You know that it takes most yoga students, myself included, several months or even years to figure out that binding in the Marichyasana positions depends almost entirely on the way that you set up your foundation. So for simplicity, let's look at Marichyasana A. Sapta, you'll jump through, set up on the front of the sit bone and straighten one leg out. Now, when you take the other leg into the Marichyasana position, you'll try to pull the heel just outside the hip. That creates a little bit of internal rotation in the upper leg bone. It's kind of like Triangmukha Ekapada Paschimottanasana. And what that does is it creates this little space in between the foot and your other leg, and that's going to be really useful because you're going to fold forward into that space. It's even more useful on the twisting positions, but I'll come back to that in a moment. Now, when your heel is right in close just outside the hip, that creates this forward angle of the shin. Your knee tracks forward over the toe, and that lets you get down and hook the shoulder low on the shin, and from there it's really easy to fold forward, maybe even bringing the chin in contact with the other leg. If you have your foot extended out in front of you, even just a little bit, that's going to make the posture really difficult because now you have the opposite angle of the shin, and the lower down you try to hook your shoulder, the more difficult it's going to be to bind. The tendency is that people will just hook around the knee, and that makes it almost impossible to get forward. So looking at the twists, of course, having that little space in between your foot and your other leg is going to be really useful because that gives you this mobility to bring your knee into the midline of your body. The first thing that you're going to do when you try to bind is hook the shoulder on the outside of the knee. So bringing your knee in close to the shoulder is going to be really helpful. If you set up this kind of unstable foundation where you've got one leg extended out, the other foot is right there, and you're just kind of balancing on it, your knee is going to be tracking all the way out, and it's going to be almost impossible for you to get your shoulder to the outside of the knee. And so the way that you place that foot is to set the outer frame of your foundation of that posture. The other side gets a lot of stability from the straight leg, and essentially what you're going to do is try to energetically activate that leg, much like we do for many of the other asanas in Ashtanga yoga. And that's going to be not just to let the leg sleep. You don't want your foot to be floppy in that posture, and neither do you want to engage the whole thing. Sometimes I hear this cue about lifting the kneecaps or really engaging the quadricep. Sometimes I even see the heel coming right up off the ground, and that is just a little bit too much. It's a little bit too intense. What I would encourage you to do is set yourself on the front of that sit bone, extend the leg out in front of you, and then just flex the foot. And that will give you all the energetic engagement that you need to have a really solid foundation for these postures. Now, what about when you take the lotus positions, Marichyasana B and D? That's really important to keep that same sense of stability on that side. So you'll try to keep the lotus leg as far on the ground as you possibly can. Sometimes we have this tendency to set this really beautiful lotus position, but then when we take the other leg into the Marichyasana position, the lotus comes all the way off the ground, and you're just kind of balancing on one sit bone, and it's not a very stable base to build the asana on, and we still have quite a lot of building to do at this point. So essentially what I would recommend is try to keep that side down on the ground. And if you have trouble with that, you can lean all the way over to that side while you take the other leg into your Marichyasana position. And that sets you up really nicely to go forward in Marichyasana B or to twist in Marichyasana D. Just keep in mind that even when you have one leg in the lotus position, you'll still want to set up your Marichyasana leg in exactly the same way. Heel just outside the hip. Exactly the same for Marichyasana A, B, C, and D. What about this little space that exists underneath the sit bone of the Marichyasana leg? That is a very common question that I get even from students who've been practicing for years and years and years. What should I do about this? How do I make it go away? Is it really that much of a problem? And it depends very much on the proportions of the student. You can get the sit bone down if your proportions are appropriate for that, but for the vast majority of students, you're totally fine to just allow that little bit of space. It usually helps you get forward in the ones where you have to move forward. And if it's not appropriate for you, it actually has kind of a negative effect when you're twisting, because the tendency is that you'll find that space to get the sit bone down by leaning back. And you might be able to find the balance point sitting on the sit bones, but you'll be leaning so far back that it's really difficult to breathe, really unstable, and feels uncomfortable. Sometimes you won't even find the balance point and you'll fall all the way back. And so ultimately being able to lock your hands together and bind in these postures isn't even as valuable as setting up this solid foundation. I think that's a very highly revered part of these postures simply because it's the last piece of the puzzle to fall into place. If you build the posture from the ground up and you eventually get to a point of resistance where you kind of need adjustment or you need modification, that is completely acceptable. But as long as you set up your solid foundation, you will be able to experience the asanas with stability and ease, and that will bring you much closer to enjoying the fundamentals of the Ashtanga yoga practice. All right, give those things a go. Let me know how you do. Subscribe for all the videos. See you next time.